A man was cleaning out his attic when he found an old cardboard box. Across the top, written in thick black marker, was a single word: broken. For years, he had never bothered opening it. The label seemed to tell him everything he needed to know. What could possibly be there in the broken stuff? But one rainy afternoon, he finally lifted the lid. Inside were old photographs, letters, and a sealed envelope. His handwriting, his name, and across the front, written by a much younger version of himself, were the words, "The worst thing that ever happened to me." He opened the letter and immediately remembered the heartbreak that inspired it. Back then, those words felt true. Today, they didn't. The memory was the same. The pain had been real. But after all these years, he no longer agreed with the label. And as he sat there holding the letter, a thought crossed his mind. Maybe the memory wasn't what needed revisiting. The label was. Hi, and welcome back. We often hear the same advice whenever we are struggling with the past. Let it go. As if memories are objects we can simply put down and walk away from. Most of us have tried, and most of us discovered that it doesn't work quite that way. The memory stays, the feeling stays, the questions stay. So perhaps the problem isn't that we are holding on to the past. Perhaps we are holding on to a description of the past that no longer fits. It's surprising how often we reduce entire chapters of our lives to a single sentence. He left. I failed. I wasn't enough. That mistake ruined everything. This sentence becomes the label, and eventually we stop looking beyond it. But life is rarely that simple. A younger version of us experiences something painful and tries to make sense of it. The conclusion we reach in that moment often feels permanent. Yet, years later, with more experience, more understanding, and a little more compassion for ourselves, we may discover that the story wasn't as simple as we once believed. Maybe the relationship didn't end because you weren't worth loving. Maybe it ended because the other person couldn't give what you needed. Maybe you weren't abandoned. Maybe you were holding on to someone who was never truly available to begin with. Maybe you weren't foolish for caring. Maybe you were simply sincere. The facts don't change. The years don't change. The memory doesn't change. But the meaning sometimes does. And the meaning is often where the weight lives. The difficult part is that we become attached to our labels. Not because they make us happy, because they become familiar. If we have spent years telling ourselves a certain story, changing it can feel like denying our own experience. As though seeing things differently somehow makes the pain less real. But it doesn't. The younger version of you was doing the best they could with the understanding they had at the time. They weren't lying, they were hurting. And people in pain often write labels that are too small for the full story. A heartbreak becomes a life sentence. A disappointment becomes proof of failure. A closed door becomes evidence that we weren't enough. Years later, we may finally be able to see what that younger version of ourselves couldn't. Not because we are wiser than we were, not because we are wiser than they were, but because we are standing somewhere they hadn't reached yet. I think peace arrives for many of us not when we erase the past, but when we stop viewing it through labels written in the middle of our pain. Because a person writing from the middle of a storm sees the world differently than a person looking back after the sky has cleared. The younger version of us wasn't wrong, just incomplete. And perhaps that's why some memories become lighter over time. Not because we forget them, not because they stop mattering, but because one day we realize the label we have been carrying no longer tells the whole story. And when that happens, something remarkable occurs. The memory stays exactly where it is, but its grip on us begins to loosen. And for the first time in a very long while, we can look back at that chapter, not with bitterness or regret, but with a gentle smile, as if we are finally reading the whole story instead of just the title. Hope you too get the courage to read beyond the title. Until next thought, take care.